Technically, the capture of big data is usually eclipsed by the complexity of the devices we operate: smartphones, tablets, laptops, Internet of Things, drones, self-driving cars. All of them are provided with sensors, cameras, GPS, and tracking software that provide high-level reading of text, digital images, and videos. Additionally, these devices are constantly and indiscriminately uploading users' information to data servers where it's managed by companies and data trackers without authorization. Nowadays, data is produced through massive use of interconnected technologies that can be processed and analyzed on a much higher level than was previously possible. These practices are called online tracking and consist of collecting and profiling data anonymously from its user's identity, references, interest, intentions, and personality. The objective of data mining is to be precise doing automatic decisions. For this proposal, companies and platforms such as Google or Facebook offers online services in order to collect and evaluate people behaviors, social relationships, and most private moments. Once this data is scored, clients can get access to globally unique corporative individual ID, which are connected to the digital profiles distributed across multiple companies. Today's presentation will focus on data capture mechanisms. First step in this surveillance chain starts with the user's personal data collection through sensors and digital identifiers, such as MAC addresses, IP addresses, browsers, cookies, and other technology, recording every single click and transmitting information to those companies. All of these sensors and interfaces are able to measure the position, the motion, the environment through photometers, thermometers, barometers, but also biometric data, voice and face recognition, keystrokes, and even computer mode dynamics. With more or less 30 sensors, a smartphone is capable of storing information such as calls, text, messages, contact list, calendars, notes, videos, visited website, GPS location, and they are used by a single person, which makes them perfect devices for spying. Internet of Things technology is usually combined with apps and devices that monitor activities, bodies, and health of humans. Even fields such as fitness and wearables establish a continuous measure of daily life routines, pulse rate, number of steps walking, sleep duration, and quality, sport activities, weight loss, or eating habits. Fact, which become Internet of Things an important element in this ubiquitous computer and invisible digital world. This list of devices, platforms, and services is interconnected in such a way that it is impossible to escape detection. The cross-device and platform matching consists on linking user identity records with social network profiles, online and mobile behavior, data brokers, and platforms. This mechanism is used by large players such as Google, Amazon, using it mainly for online advertising, but also behind the scenes, these ubiquitous technologies of tracking and pricing are used in crucial areas of life such as finance, insurance, housing, healthcare, law enforcement, and employment. That easily end up in discriminatory automatic decisions based in digital profiles about consumers, individuals, and vulnerable population groups. Interfaces play an important role in the surveillance ecosystem. The graphic user interface mice, touchscreens, and keyboards are elements that perform the translation between humans and computer. This direct interaction makes them gateways to analyze human behavior. Keystroke dynamics have been used to identify users. For example, key press and release events provide enough information to describe human emotions. Variables like the number of mistakes and the number of special characters, longer pauses in typing, the timing of single keystrokes, events are analyzed by machine learning models and classification algorithms. Those predictions were able to automatically identify emotional states of users such as confidence, nervousness, sadness, with a precision of 80%. In this point, I want to launch the question: how can our practices visualize underlying problems related to the data mining, digital tracking, data brokers, governments, corporation platforms, and surveillance? How can artists use software and machine learning, cookies, app, plugins, services, or devices to develop new artworks? Which kind of strategies are proposed to unmask these bad practices already mentioned? Exploring the role of interfaces in surveillance, the artistic project Keyboard of Things consists in a series of hybrid devices connecting computer keyboards and objects such as tennis racket, pillows, boxing bags, or grenades. By using these defunctionalized interfaces across social networks, mail, or browsing, a user can type random sequences of text, generating wrong information that works against pattern recognition by typing. Keyboards of Things use strategies such as obfuscation, confusion, hacking, disruption, gamification to open discourses about interfaces functionality and surveillance. Mouse tracking technology allows to record remotely mouse activity such as path movements, clicks, pauses, scrolling, but also reading activity, scanning activity, doubts, difficulty, decision-making activity, anxiety, or early decisions. The Random User is a project based in a computer mouse combined with wheels, finger, a servo, and microcontroller. The device moves freely and click randomly without any control. Another early attempt to visualize this issue is the Jackson 2 experiment, an artistic installation combining an iPod oscilloscope and a fitness app called Nike Plus. The artist duo managed to simulate patterns of human running by fixing the iPod to the handle powered by a servo motor. The common goal of all these techniques are achieve a deeper understanding of user to improve the user experience, to find behavioral patterns in touchpad, to optimize their website according to a specific browsing behavior. In this sense, the art project interface is a physical bot designed to complicate the relation between systems. They provide raw information for website analysis, fighting against the graphic user interface standards. It performs as an intruder, clicking, opening and closing application, taking decisions, collapsing social networks, typing random comments and posting them in your name. The project Tender, it's how people meet, is a piece of pork attached to an electrical motor that swipes every picture of a potential date to the right. These three examples are autonomous interfaces acting as parasite in the top of another interface. As there is no programming code between them, they behave as human, breaking the barrier between interconnected technologies. They are undetectables and produce noise, confusing data collection and making the data less valuable. Digging deeper into this discourse, the art project Fango, developed by Martin Nadal, consists in a microcontroller embedded in a phone charger. It's programmed to behave as a random bot, able to take the control of the smartphone when the user loads it. Nadal states that the aim of this project is to add noise to the capture of data, making it difficult to make predictions and devaluing the effect of extracted data. Scaremail by Benjamin Grosser proposed to disrupt the NSA surveillance programs in the detection of predetermined keywords by generating specific keywords to every new email algorithmically which is created. Another interesting example of hacked sensor in the field of tracking vision and biometrics is the art project Autonomous Trap by James Bridle. The artist makes ground marking and trap anonymous vehicles using no entry and another clips. Anonymous Trap draws attention to the fact that industrial tracking vision technology is underdeveloped. Some examples in browsers are Internet Noise. It's a web that opens automatically random tabs. Track Me Not is a browser extension that helps the protection of when you are sharing by using strategies such as noise and obfuscation, or ad nauseam is a plugin that quietly click in every block ad. Facial Weaponization Suite by Zach Blass talks against biometric facial recognition. The project consists of making collective masks in several workshops. In conclusion, the extraction and monetization of private data is a reality that directly affects all citizens of the world. In this business model, based on capture and processing and prediction of human behavior, devices, technologies, platforms, governments, and domain companies are interconnected to assess, qualify, control, and manipulate groups of people. Opposing this, hacker communities, cypherpunks, political activists, and tactical media movements aims to present a vision that clarifies technological difference and control mechanisms. In the internet and everyday life, citizens need privacy, space for self-expression, access to information, learning, spaces for social life and communication. Users need mechanisms to transform and benefit from these technologies. Consequently, artists can reclaim the use of other strategies such as obfuscation, camouflage, confusion, appropriation, hacking, disruption, bot, noise, random data, parasitism, mask, sense of humor, paranoia, metaphors of paradox. These control strategies and forms of resistance sometimes consist of simple individual actions such as blocking, covering, isolating, or disrupting signals in order to generate false readings that confuse the mechanisms of data capture. Thanks.
Thank you to the organizers of this conference for making this conference happening virtually and for inviting me to speak on artificial intelligence and social justice. This paper is the outcome of a research collaboration between myself from the Faculty of Media and Knowledge Sciences at the University of Malta and Dr. Dennis Rojo, who is researching into algorithmic sovereignty and the co-founder of the think tank Dyna.org from the Netherlands. In order to lay the foundations for discussion around the argument that the adoption of artificial intelligence, AI technologies, benefits the powerful few, focusing on their own existential concerns, we decided to narrow down our analysis of the argument to jurisprudence, the philosophy of law, considering also the historical context. The paper does not discuss current forms and applications of artificial intelligence, as so far there is no AI technology which is self-conscious and self-aware, being able to deal with emotional and social intelligence. It is a discussion around AI as a speculative hypothetical entity. One could then ask, if such a speculative self-consciousness hardware-software system were created, at what point could one talk of personhood? And what criteria could there be in order to say an AI system was capable of committing AI crimes? In order to address AI crimes, the paper will start by outlining what might constitute personhood in discussing legal positivism and natural law. Concerning what constitutes AI crime, the paper uses the criteria given by Thomas King's et al. Paper, Artificial Intelligence Crime and Interdisciplinary Analysis of the Foreseeable Threats and Solutions, where King et al. Coined the term AI crime, mapping 5 areas in which AI might, in the foreseeable future, commit crimes, namely 1. Commerce, financial markets, and insolvency. 2. Harmful or dangerous drugs. 3. Offenses against personhood. 4. Sexual offenses. 5. Theft and fraud and forgery and personalization. We discussed the construction of legal system through the lens of a political involvement and what one may want to consider to be the powerful elites. In doing so, we will be demonstrating that it is difficult to prove that the adoption of AI technologies is undertaken in a way which mainly serves a powerful class in society. Nevertheless, analyzing the culture around AI technologies with regard to the nature of law, with a philosophical and sociological focus, enables us to demonstrate a utilitarian and authoritarian trend in the adoption of AI technologies. I will then narrow down our discussion of utilitarian trends through the use of Tim Crook's notion of power elites. This is where Michel Foucault's theories on discipline and power come in. According to Foucault, the disciplinary power of legislation leads to a self-discipline of individuals. Foucault argues that the institutions of court and judges motivate such a self-disciplining of individuals, and that self-disciplining rules serves more and more as a norm. Foucault's theories are especially helpful in discussing how the rule of truth has disciplined civilization, allowing for an adoption of AI technologies which seem to benefit mainly the powerful elite. But then, should we think of a notion of deep truth as the unwieldy product of deep learning AI algorithms? Discussions around truth, Foucault states, from legislation into something what, and here I quote Foucault, decides, transmits, and itself extends upon the effects of power, end of quote, are Foucault's theories help to explain how legislation as an institution is rolled out throughout society with very little resistance or proletarian counter-justice. Foucault explains that this has made the justice system and legislation a for-profit system. With this understanding of legislation and social justice, one needs to reflect further on Foucault's notion of how disciplinary power seeks to express its distributed nature in the modern state. Namely, one has to analyze the distributed nature of those AI technologies, especially through networks and protocols, so that the link can now be made to AI technologies becoming legally more profitable in the hands of a powerful elite. If power generates new opportunities rather than simply repressing them, then, following Foucault, more interaction and participation can extend and not simply challenge power relations. Foucault offers a valuable insight into power relations relevant also within AI technologies. It is the product of research that was undertaken by Foucault over a period of 20 years. Foucault uses the metaphor of a chemical catalyst for a resistance which can bring to light power relationships and thus allow for an analysis of the methods this power uses. And here I quote Foucault, rather than analyzing power from the point of view of its internal rationality. It consists of analyzing power relations through the antagonisms of strategies." End of quote. In his book Protocol, Alexander Galloway describes how these protocols change the notion of power and how control exists after decentralization. Galloway argues that the protocol has a close connection to Foucault's concept of biopolitics by claiming that the key to perceiving protocol is power to acknowledge that protocol is an effective aesthetic force that has control over life itself. Galloway suggests that it is important to discuss more than the technologies and to look into the structures of control within technology system, which also includes underlying codes and protocols in order to distinguish between methods that can support collective production. Example here, sharing of AI technologies within society, and those that put AI technologies in the hands of the powerful few. Galloway's argument in his chapter Hacking is that the existence of protocols not only installs control into a terrain that on its surface appears actively to resist it, but goes on to create the highly controlled network environment. For Galloway, hacking is an index of protological transformation taking place in the broader world of a technoculture. Here, John Adams and Roger Burnswood give a more nuanced view of contemporary legislation. They argue that legislation aims to institute public order. Legislation sets up authoritative mechanisms whereby social order can be established and maintained. Social change managed disputes, settled policies and goals for the community adopted. Adams and Burns would go on to argue that legal code is good in the favor of a powerful elite, and that those who engage more with politics in society, examples of which could be the corporate sector producing AI technologies, and businesses and elites kind of seeking to use AI technologies for profits, etc. According to Adams and Burnswood, there seems to be no unbiased, fair legislation or legal code, and the maintenance of public order must simply reproduce an unfair class society. If this is the case, following Adams and Burnswood argumentation, one can argue that indeed the adoption of AI technologies does not allow for a utilitarian ethical code benefiting society, but rather conforms to the interest of a small group, those owning AI technologies. It becomes evident that the freedom to engage with those technologies is left to those who have the financial means, and of course with it the legal means to do so. In a culture dominated by economics, legislations and technologies are being outlined and modeled by those powerful elites. Most institutions concerned by the debate on ethics of automation today have resorted to the adoption of a so-called open world assumption principle, providing a sort of safety valve. As a last resort, civil rights to raise a flag and ask for intervention of a human being in the analysis of consideration of judicial decisions. In such a case, institutional operators can always override decisions established by automated systems, posing risks of different nature to the integrity of the process. Having said this, the prospect could be raised that restorative justice might offer a solution that could deliver a more meaningful justice with respect to AI technologies and the potential inherent for speculative AI crimes, as outlined in the beginning of this paper. Instead of following a retributive legislative approach, an ethical discourse with a deeper consideration for sufferers of such AI crimes could be adopted. Acting ethically is more difficult than ever, nevertheless, nowadays, due to the hyper expansion of big data and also artificial intelligence. Following the semantic slide from the noun university to that of enterprise, research into artificial intelligence has gone from being a public service undertaken mainly at universities to being run and regarded as business, run by big corporations such as Alphabet, the parent company of Google and Facebook, etc., created to generate profit. The companies need to attract a large number of paying customers. AI technologies have become workers in the market economy, rarely following any ethical guidelines. We ask, could restorative justice offer an alternative way of dealing with the occurrence of AI crimes. Dale Miller and Neil Vidmar describe two psychological perceptions of justice. One is behavioral control, following the legal code as strictly as possible, punishing any wrongdoer, and second, the restorative justice system, which focuses on restoration. Thus, an alternative approach for the ethical implementation of AI technologies with respect to legislation might be to follow restorative justice principles. Restorative justice would allow for AI technologies to learn how to care about ethics. Julia Fionda describes restorative justice as a conciliation between victim and offender, during which the offense is deliberated upon. Both parties try to come to an agreement on how to achieve restoration for the damage done to the situation before the crime, here an AI crime, happened. Restorative justice advocates compassion for the victim and offender and a consciousness in the part of the offenders as to the repercussion of their crimes. One can argue that these evils are being more evident nowadays with the advance of AI technologies. For AI crimes, punishment in the classical sense may seem to be adequate. Niels Christie, however, criticizes this form of execution of the law. He argues that through conflict there is the potential to discuss the rules given by the law, allowing for a restorative process rather than a process characterized by punishment and strict following of the rules. Christie states that those suffering most from the crimes are suffering twice, as although it is the offenders being put on trial, the victims have very little say in the courtroom hearings, where mainly lawyers argue with one another. It basically boils down to guilty or not guilty, and no discussion in between. Christie argues that running restorative conferencing session helps both sides to come to terms with what happened. The victims of AI crimes would not only be placed in front of a court, but also be offered engagement in the process of seeking justice and restoration. Restorative justice might support victims of AI crimes better than the punitive legal system, as it allows for the sufferers of AI crimes to be heard in a personalized way, which could be adapted to the needs of the victims and offenders. As victims and offenders represent themselves in a restorative conferencing session, these become much more affordable, meaning that the barrier to seeking justice due to the financial cost would be partly eliminated, allowing for poor parties to be able to contribute to the process of justice. This would benefit wider society, and AI technologies would not only be defined by a powerful elite. Restorative justice could hold the potential not only to discuss the AI crimes themselves, but also to get to the root of the problem and discuss the cause of an AI crime, making re-offending harder. In such a scenario, a future AI system capable of committing AI crimes would need to have knowledge of ethics around the particular discourse of restorative justice. The implementation of AI technologies will lead to a discourse around who is responsible for actions taken by AI technologies. Even when considering clearly defined ethical guidelines, these might be difficult to implement due to the pressure of competition of AI systems they find themselves in. That said, this speculation is restricted to humanized artificial intelligence systems. The main hindrance for AI technologies to be part of such a restorative justice system might be that of the very human emotion of shame. And with that, I come kind of to the conclusion, proposing a so-called advanced jurisprudence. Without a clear understanding of shame, it will be impossible to resolve AI crimes in a restorative manner. Thus, one might want to think about a humanized, a cyborgian proposal of a symbiosis between humans and technology, along the lines of Garry Kasparov's advanced chess, as in advanced jurisprudence, a legal system where human and machine work together on restoring justice for social justice. Thank you very much. If you have any questions, please do feel free to contact me over email. My email address is here on the final slides. Have a good day, everybody. Thank you.
Hi, I'm Rilla Khaled from Design and Computation Arts at Concordia University. And today, on behalf of my co-authors Stephen Sitch, Samuelle Bourgault, and Pippin Barr, I'll tell you about work that we've been doing through the NeoCub project, and the title of this paper is NeoCub, Creating a World Through Speculative Play. To date, speculative design has taken many shapes and forms. Our interest in it concerns a form we refer to as speculative play, which leverages digital playful interaction to realize and communicate its worlding. Worlding is a central concern in speculative design, which is all about evoking realities and worlds that relate to while also diverging from our present realities. The speculative design process involves both world building, how do I bring a particular world to life, and also world interrogating. Is the evoked world the right world? Today I'll be sharing a trajectory of how world building and interrogating took place during the design of NeoCub, an augmented reality speculative play experience. NeoCub is a play on the word niqab, the full face cover that some Muslim women wear. In 2017 in Quebec, Bill 62 was passed, which bans women who wear niqab from accessing public services. Services as banal and fundamental as taking the bus. In 2019, Quebec passed Bill 21, which bans people working in the public sphere from wearing religious symbols. Religious symbols obviously include niqab, but also hijab, which is the headscarf in which the face is visible. To put it bluntly, these bills disproportionately affect Muslim women. If you're not one of the women directly affected by this, it can be hard to engage with what it actually means at the human level. Through an AR speculative play experience, we wanted people to engage with two questions that shape this debate. Should anyone have the right to govern and control women's appearance and dress? And is dictating that women not wear particular clothing morally different from dictating that they do wear such clothing? Our design intention was to engage people in an experience that provides a darkly provocative solution to the problem of cultural and religious tolerance. In the world of NeoCub, individuals are equipped with technology that empowers them to deal with niqab-wearing women by replacing them visually. For instance, such a viewer may choose to instead see a person matching their own ethnicity, or perhaps no one at all. Core to the intended experience is that NeoCub enables total control over appearance, mirroring the control Quebec has over what Muslim women wear in the public sphere. Worth pointing out here is that we didn't actually want to develop NeoCub technology, but rather evoke the experience enough that reflection and debate could ensue. So for our first prototype, we used live chroma key involving a webcam and an unstructured piece of orange fabric that was worn like a shawl. We overlaid photos and videos onto the fabric, experimenting with mapping clothes, bodies, textures from nature, and video feeds of spaces. And from these early sessions, we took away the following observations. The base concept of NeoCub, that of identity control, had traction. The mapping communicated a dystopian world in which people's appearances were not only malleable, but under the control of others. People's outwardly expressed identity became a destabilized element. But to make any mapped photos and videos meaningful, chroma key required carefully choreographed movement from the wearer and tight control over the background. Furthermore, the worn garment alone did not constitute a large enough canvas. For the second prototype, we went for something simpler. We projected imagery of clothes and bodies onto a wearer clad in an abaya and headscarf, using a simple JavaScript tool that enables choices over backgrounds and foregrounds. After running internal playtests and trying out various combinations, we observed the following. Context, impact, and interpretation. A person in an abaya on a busy street evoked quite a different response to the same person on a crowded beach. The background therefore became an important consideration. It speaks to where certain bodies can culturally or legally exist. It also became clear that motion was key to conveying everyday existence. Our simple projection setup meant the wearer had to essentially remain stationary. But we wanted wearers to be able to move, as neocarb was about evoking control over people who exist around us day to day. We also noted that bodies were more evocative of identity control than clothes. In countries that have banned niqab, social expectations to see faces have frequently been expressed. Neocarb was about ascribing identity independently of the desires of the wearer, so we decided to forego standalone items of clothing and have controllers choose clothed bodies of people to map onto the wearer. So for the third prototype, we hooked up an Xbox Kinect to a processing sketch and a web app, with the Kinect performing body tracking. We began sourcing body images from stock photography databases. As we browsed the options on offer, we were reminded that stock photography serves as a particular normative capitalist vision of Western society. Some categories had lots of high-resolution options: young white businessman friendly, middle-aged man casual, and others had very few options. We decided to build this into our concept. In designing the user experience of the controller app, we set out to convey a flawed personal customization system. To evoke the familiar, we turned to census questionnaires for inspiration, noting in particular age brackets, characterizations of ethnicity, and language that describes occupation. Based on these categories, we then went to a stock photography bank and sought out images to populate each category, knowing that some combinations would be either thinly populated or completely absent. Once all of this felt sufficiently stable, we ran another playtest. So here's one tester playing the role of wearer. He's facing a large screen. And here's another tester playing the role of controller. He interacts via an iPad and makes choices for which body gets superimposed over the tracked body of the wearer. We learned a lot from this playtest, and I'll talk about some of this now, but there's more in the paper. So firstly, neocarb requires an amount of exposition before it can do its speculative work. We had to give impromptu and hurried explanations of the type of world neocarb evokes, as well as our own political stance. Verbally explaining this all was uncomfortably didactic and in tension with the point of our project, to embody rather than to be told. Secondly, the stock photography critique was too opaque. While we'd found the critique intellectually compelling, it failed to come through. No one was able to connect the bodies that were available for selection with the idea of biases inherent in image banks. The role for wearers was under-articulated. Whereas the controllers had an active task, which was to change the appearance of the wearer, the wearers had a very passive task, which was to stand in place wearing a garment. How we had arranged our technology also meant that the wearer was directly facing their projection, and therefore in a position to see themselves with different bodies being applied, like a large dress-up doll. And finally, bugs weakened the speculation. Our participants encountered a few bugs lurking in our software, like the backgrounds changing too quickly and the web app freezing at inopportune moments. Bugs are common in prototypes, but in the case of a speculative design, they can be especially irritating because they erode the believability of the evoked world. So for the fourth iteration of prototyping, our major objective was to address the issues that we had encountered with the previous prototype. For the controller app, the census idea had failed. The questions felt too heavy. Noting that the app was always going to be used on a tablet or mobile device, we took inspiration from existing app design solutions for sorting and categorizing identity. We looked to Tinder. And specifically, we borrowed the idea of swiping to cycle through possible identities and swiping right to select a body. We also used the idea of button-selected filters to cut down the size of the matching superbody pool. The resulting interaction experience is significantly lighter feeling. The interaction pulls it towards a familiar app experience, improving the likelihood that we hit the weird sweet spot that speculative design requires. Familiar, but also not. The other major redesign concerned what we had the wearer doing. We came up with a branching twine interactive fiction wearers could be reading on their own device that would convey moments from a day, and would ask wearers to perform physical actions at certain points for short durations of time. This way, the wearer would have something to focus on other than the controller or the projection screen, and they'd periodically perform gestures that would evoke simply existing in the world. Additionally, the twine has given us a means of engaging in worlding. The first screen begins by unfolding a fiction in which the wearer has been specially selected to participate in a closed beta of a system which is about improving everyday life. In Black Mirror-esque style, it's never revealed whose life is being improved. So that's where we're up to now. In reflecting on this design trajectory, I once more raise questions central to speculative design. How to bring a particular world to life, and is the evoked world the right world? Over 4 iterations of design, we've developed knowledge and strategies that guide how we respond to these questions. Firstly, leverage existing interactions unless there's a rhetorical reason not to. Speculative designs by their nature require people experiencing them to grapple with novel, unusual, or complex subject matter. Novel or non-standard interaction mechanics also introduce complexity. We propose that speculative designers rely on minimal UIs or well-known UI design tropes unless the interaction mechanic directly explains the subject matter, because otherwise you're simply introducing noise into what people are able to interpret. Secondly, endeavor to have the experience perform its own exposition diegetically. Speculative designs imply worlds that are like our own, but with notable differences. Interactive systems usually require some degree of explanation regarding their use, with contemporary systems typically streamlining tutorials into early-stage interaction. We propose doing the same for speculative design where possible. It increases immersion, mirrors interaction design experiences we're used to, and avoids the experience becoming didactic. Third, don't expect that a complex speculative world will be perceived on a first experience. By the time a speculative design is taking form, most likely a significant amount of background research has been invested into it. Individuals who experience a speculative design for the first time will hopefully pick up on broad details of the implied world, but are unlikely to discern more subtle ones. We remind designers that the same holds true of most media. As long as the most important rhetorics and questions are communicated, the design has achieved its goal. Finally, run the experience past individuals external to the design team frequently. Internal team members become deeply familiar with intended messages of speculative designs, and over time may no longer be good judges of whether that message is being conveyed. But speculative designs live and die by their messaging. We advocate running frequent experience tests with people external to the design team, as this enables designers to see their own work through eyes that are still unworlded. And that brings me to the end. Thank you very much.
So, hello to all the participants, and thank you very much to the 3 presenters. I am Penesta Dika. I hope you hear me. Okay.
I hear you.
I come from the field of digital art, respectively from media art history, and will moderate this session, which is about politics of sentience, devices for social justice. For me, it was very interesting to hear how differently your points of view to this theme are. So on the one side, we heard the approach of César, Escudero, Andaluz, and Christa Sommerer on how to develop new artistic strategies against the data pollution, how to contribute for changing the behavior on the use of technology through artistic strategies, and also how to visualize or just to understand those. Furthermore, we saw examples about which interfaces and which data can be used for this. They have also implemented this all in their practical artworks. And on the other side, the presentation of Adnan Hadzi discusses a very sensitive theme, namely the implementation of the AI in social justice, and also the dangers that could be expected through this implementation. Powerful elite and the AA, decentralization and the use of the AI, ethics, AI crimes were treated with the aim to give a solution for this all. And in this context was mentioned a humanized cyborg. And Rilla, Khaled and Samuelle Bourgault presented their approach that includes interaction design, which is based on playful speculative design. So they are creating a virtual, respectively, augmented reality in order to research, among other, also circumstances of wearing niqab. And cultural differences and tolerance are some of the keywords within this presentation. This is also very sensitive theme. They develop different prototypes to research this, as we saw. And now I want to make some questions for you and to open this discussion. And with this, I also invite the other participants to write their questions on the chat and so be involved in our discussion round today. And firstly, I have a question to the first presenters, to César and Christa. Your own artworks show on the one side the usage of the latest technologies, and on the other side, you use those in a critical sense. So what do you think? How will this be combined in the future? Will art maybe take a leadership role in this context?
Art is completely immersed in this context right now. Artistic practices are really aware of what are the problems of technology. In certain point, art is making the link between technology and philosophy, between technology and ethics. Something that was super clear in the past from pre-Socratic, like philosophy of technology, is something that is in certain point disconnected, in the last 200 years, where the last developments of technology have been like increasing and really fast, changing society, human beings, and well, getting inside to these categories of human perception, So basically, the examples that we saw in this paper are dealing with the first layer of interactions between human and computer. So basically, we are dealing with hardware, physical devices, ubiquitous technologies as cameras or mainly mobile phones. So we are dealing with sensors and human beings. So we are dealing between this first layer that I mentioned, but behind this layer, behind the device, there is another layer that the other presenters are talking about. So we are talking about the algorithm, like how the algorithm behave, with or against or human beings, and also in the third presenter, the consequences, for example, the artwork I saw from Zach Glass
is talking also about how algorithms can discriminate different collectives, people, different genders, and minority population groups, no, which is really connected with the third presenter, no, and most of them are talking what happened behind the first layer of graphic user interface, no, which is really connected with the ethics that the second presenter. So I think this is, well, my overview of how our talks can be connected, and we could start a dialogue after that.
So
maybe
Christa, for you, maybe.
If I can add to this, since César is here also with us at the University of Art and Design at the Interface Cultures Department, and we started this program around 20 years ago, and the context since then has of course totally changed. When artists in the field of media started to do interfaces or interactive art, it was kind of innocent at that time, you know. There was still this vision of the global village and sharing the data and sharing the knowledge. But of course, now that large companies are occupying and monopolizing this data, and we live now in a world of data capitalism, I think we as artists have to really question also, what does this mean to not us as artists, but also to a whole society? And how can we deal with this data ethical approach? And how can we sort of liberate the data again and give it back to people in a more data common sense? And I think this sort of ethical component, but also political component that, and César expressed it very well, is somehow what is behind the interfaces is something that artists recently very much, look into. And coming back to your question, of course, you have to use the latest technologies, because only with this hacking, or I think it was very nicely put also with speculative design approaches or art approaches, you can bring up these questions and really look at the layers of what is behind those interfaces and make people aware of it.
Okay, thank you. And to Adnan, Hadzi, as first question, I wanted to ask you, how did you came to such a sensitive theme, justice and AI, and who uses it in real, not just in virtual? Could you say something here more?
Sure. Well, it really does stem from actually the research which I've been doing at Goldsmiths University of London first, because we have been looking actually much more into media law and ethics. So actually, how do we deal with plain simple libel cases? What do we do if journalists write any kind of stuff about people? And this really came into the notion of artificial intelligence just by plain simple social networks, how the algorithms are actually scooping through all the data, which we rarely have any understanding of what is actually happening without it. And that's like the previous speakers also have mentioned, this is really also to liberate the data and see what is happening with this data. But for us, and also I referred also to Jeremy Riojo, who has been working at a think tank, Dyna.org, that has been very much a speculative discussion, then going further into what would happen if we actually would have a humanized artificial intelligence, go through this whole discussion of post-humanism and transhumanist discourses and all these conflicts which are there as well, and really do take it to the level or discursive level of speculation. What can we do to have an artificial intelligence actually caring about society? So not only something which is there to generate profits, but having algorithms which are basically encoded in care for society. And of course, that is a very highly speculative field, where I'd say we end up now also with the whole notion of caring for the environment. So these are kind of the aspects, but it all, to come back to the question, actually left from media law and ethics, and really the research we've been doing there, ending up much more in a speculative manner which I think now is moving much more into actually analyzing language, how we actually use language and how we can speak with computers who speak with us. So actually computers and bots, we have no idea with that they're actually algorithms we're talking and communicating with.
Thank you for the answer. Rilla, Khaled, what are the results at all via the usage of the interactive work that you have approached in different modules? And I would also like to know, how do people react to this all that you have shown?
So sadly, because of a couple of factors. So first of all, I went on maternity leave right after we did the most recent developments, the iterations that I talk about in the paper. And that, coupled with coronavirus, has meant that we haven't been able to release this thing yet. But one thing that I think is really interesting and perhaps changes the flavor of this whole piece, this whole experiment, is that our attitudes towards masking have changed significantly. So I'm curious to see what's going to happen once the world, well, it's never going to go back to normal, but once we do have a vaccine, what does that mean in terms of people's right to cover their faces?
Yeah, that's a big problem now. You should have adopted now in between. So I have another question for you, Rilla. And how does NeoCap stay in connection with the Piero San Simon that you mentioned in your paper, in the abstract?
With what, sorry?
Piero San Simon, this is sculpture that you mentioned on the abstract online.
Sorry, I don't believe.
Yeah. Okay.
Yep.
Yeah, I got the. Maybe I don't pronounce it good.
Yeah, I'm not too sure. Okay, well, one thing that has occurred to me as I listened to all of the works presented by the speakers in this session is like in different ways, I feel like we're all moving towards the idea that what we do with data, with AI, it all needs to be significantly more participatory than it is by default at this current moment in time. So for instance, with César and Christa, the idea of liberating data, and with Adnan's work, where he's talking about AI and restorative justice and how do we make AIs that care, well, AIs that seem to care about the ethics that we care about. And then, you know, my own work, which is using using speculative design to address questions that fall outside of the sort of academic tower and the typical kinds of concerns of speculative design. So I think that's something that's really interesting to note, is we're all about like getting people back into this process.
Does somebody wants to say something due to this that Rilla mentioned?
I think this was thanks, Rilla, for your comment. I really also liked what you said, that it's true that sometimes in our communities we are somehow surrounded by people who speak the same language, who know the same jargon, who know the same sort of assumptions that we make. And I think it was really important what you said about speculative design, that we need to really test those type of prototypes or artworks, or however we call them, products or projects, also outside of our communities, and see whether really people understand it. And I suppose that with the project that you are doing, there is a lot of potential of bringing in, you know, people's opinions, because I'm sure that a lot of people have a very strong opinion about how would they like to appear in public space, and who has the right to project something onto them, or who has the right to hide their identity. So I think this is like a huge topic, and I think it's always very good, and that's why we like to do interactive art, because it gives you the potential to bring in people that are not just from your community, but also people from outside, and trigger some kind of emotional discussion about these topics.
Yeah. Thank you, Christa.
Also, I would like to point out, like as you mentioned, participation, no? Participation as a big strategy, no, against post-human. In certain way, algorithms are taking decisions, no. So the human is going out to the decision what the machine is taking, no. So starting a participatorial and engage people to get inside to this process of participation or gamification or speculation, no. Launch this big strategy, no, to rethink what is going on behind this technological world.
And do you think, César, that people understand what you are awaiting from them when they participate with your artwork? For instance, with Interfight that I know from you. Do you think they understand the issue, why you did this, or is just playfully for them? And what do you think? What do people think about that? What they told you?
In general, an artwork when it's in an exhibition space is an open artwork, no? It's open to different interpretations. Actually, if the artwork, if the metaphor of the layers of, for example, the metaphor of understanding of an artwork is like an onion. The first layer of understanding, it could be the hook, no, the topic. But then deeply, as far as you are getting in the artwork and getting and the understanding of the different layers of these discourses of open discourses, this artwork is opening, you can get, no, insight to these ideas of data and data pollution, no. Otherwise, there is another ways of explaining, no. For example, having the caption of the artwork really well developed with a really nice keywords is also a way of helping to the audience to get the meaning of the artwork. But in general, yes, when in the experience of the exhibition, I had the impression, no, of the people approach me to talk about the topic, and most of the people already know what's going on, no. It's like Edgar Snowden shows what the NSA is doing in 2013, and there is like a lot of bunch of information, no. But in certain point, we continue using, no, this Facebook, this Google, and even though that we are aware of the algorithm is experimenting with us, that things are going on, even though we are using this application, we are taking part of this monopolium. And I want to start this point of conversation, no. It's like what is, in certain point, the services that we are getting from this company, we like it, no. So the algorithms are working well. They are giving us the information, really accurate information that we want. But the real problem is who owns this data and what they are doing with, no. Is the main question that all of us already knows.
Do you want to add, Adnan, to this question something?
Sorry, I just unmute. Yes, I think I really also think it's about then the algorithm itself. So the data, of course, the open data, who owns the data and who's actually using that data. But then I think we are almost now in the time where data has all been already captured. Like Transmediale once said, capture all. I think it was quite a nice slogan, because basically now we are dealing with companies who are actually using algorithms in order to kind of mine that data. And I think that is quite an important fact to be aware of, that these algorithms, they're kind of running free now in the moment, and kind of is a Wild West situation we're in, because there is no kind of legal structure we're actually capable as society to deal with, because technology has advanced so much that jurisprudence, the whole judicial system is actually not able of keeping up. And there, I think, is an interesting artwork is from Mediengruppe Bitnik, which was called Random Darknet Chopper, which really asks this question of who is actually responsible when such an algorithm runs wild. The Random Darknet Chopper, as an example, has actually been using Bitcoin as a currency to randomly shop on the dark webs anything for up to $100 US in Bitcoins, and get it delivered to the gallery. So of course the gallery received then all different kinds of things, such as a fake passport, platinum Visa card, which people would have really thought police will actually step in, because I think the platinum Visa card could have a spending limit of up to $100,000 or something like that. And of course the fake passport is then identity theft and things like that. But nothing happened except for ecstasy pills, which were then delivered. So only the drug kind of enforcement suddenly was then making the police run after the art exhibition and actually pack and wrap it up. And then the whole discussion started, because then, of course, the judges had to say who is now responsible for this algorithm having bought 10 pills of super potent ecstasy being exhibited in the gallery, and no one really knows. And I think this is actually happening on a much larger scale. We're actually witnessing now a high frequency trading, which is doing exactly that, but in billions of value, and no one really asks who is actually responsible for those algorithms. And now we take it a level further into artificial intelligence, because that's just plain simple stupid algorithms. I also think artificial intelligence is probably better said stupid intelligence or something like that, or artificial stupidity, but still we're talking now about the next level. And then ours is really kind of looking into a much more speculative level. What happens if we can't distinguish between human intelligence and kind of bot intelligence, and if all of this becomes blended? I think we really are in a desperate need of a justice system, for a legal structure which is not there. And that's kind of what we try to point out with the paper.
How do you see the future of restorative justice at all for AI?
Okay, that was kind of in the end. I think the biggest trouble is that it probably will. It's almost impossible for AI systems to actually deal with restorative justice, because that is a very human thing. But like I said in the end of the paper, it is kind of dealing with the notion of shame. I mean, if you look at restorative conferencing and how this works, it really needs to have all the parties coming together. So I think an algorithm simply cannot do that, or maybe, who knows. But my proposition, or our proposition, that was kind of Dennis' approach as well, was to actually follow the advanced jurisprudence and have human machine working together. So basically by being assisted by artificial intelligence when a judge is coming, or when the court is sitting, because it's not only a judge, because restorative justice means that victim perpetrators, they sit together and actually discuss it. And that discussion is actually assisted by artificial intelligence with all the data mining capabilities, with all the algorithmic capabilities and so forth. But I would see it as an advanced jurisprudence. That would be kind of the approach to bring in restorative justice. Otherwise, I think it's impossible, or almost unachievable, to teach an algorithm the very emotion of shame. That's kind of like.
Let us see what the future brings. Maybe it will be possible. I want to invite the audience. I don't see the audience here, but I want to invite them to make questions in chat if they wish, and if they have something to ask, then please, you can do it on a chat, and then I will read it for you. So I'm sorry, I don't see the audience. So so for instance, I wanted to ask also for your artwork, Christa, with plants implements very well the idea of sanctions, and Do you think that the digital art can really change the perception of the way how we treat plants, for instance, respectively on how we use the technology in the future in this context? Is this possible, or what can we do better, to say it like that?
Well, I think you are referring to a project that we did almost 30 years ago in 1992, where we connected some real plants through an interface to a computer, and then people could touch plants to grow artificial plants. And what we experienced back then is that a lot of people told us, oh, this is unique, they've never seen something like that. And it somehow reminded them to the idea that plants have some kind of sensitivity. And they knew, you know, there is this kind of dependence that we have as humans on plants. So back then it was more like a curiosity. But now, almost 30 years later, we see that a lot of people suddenly, you know, speak about, you know, we should take care more about the environment, we should take care more about the plants, our relationship to nature in general. So what we saw in the last 30 years is a huge shift of perception. And this is, of course, due to the environmental crisis, but also due to technologies, also sensor technologies, that, you know, and research, a lot of research goes into plant intelligence and so forth. So I think the art, and that's what I really hope and believe in, art and also media art has really a strong potential. We could also call it, you know, speculative design, if it involves enough people and keeps on, you know, introducing new memes into society to really make a long-term change. I truly believe in that. And I think, like Adnan said, also, we will see also new types of forms of, you know, data justice systems. They have to come because, like you say, it's the Wild West right now.
Thank you. Can you imagine, Rilla, that something like that would happen also with your artwork in 20 years? This shift that Christa mentioned?
I would certainly hope so. I mean, like, just reflecting on, you know, all of the ideas that have been raised today, I guess something that keeps coming back to me is that part of what we're doing is, with all of our works, we're thinking about, okay, what is possible, what is currently possible with technology, and we sort of pull it in directions because it's being used in particular ways already. Often people don't know how it's being used, or they just accept or they take for granted that, you know, because, for instance, my phone tracks me in a particular way, yay, that's great, I get the data that I immediately need, and we don't think about the repercussions because we have not been trained to think about those things. Maybe we haven't been raised with these technologies. And it's moving so much faster than our ethics and ethical systems and ways of making moral decision making. It's faster, and it's also I would say that responsibility, guilt, shame, these are also stretched across networks, and we're perhaps not very well equipped to think about that right now either. So the role of art, media art, with regards to these types of questions, I think a huge part of what we do is changing people's desires and changing people's questions. And I think that right now, in particular, we also exist in a point in time where people are open to these types of things.
Okay, thank you. Do you want to add something in this, César?
Yeah, well, I could also point out the CO2 footprint that artificial intelligence training algorithms is using right now. No, a bunch of computer interconnected, and just to continue with the dialogue Christa opens before. No, so also artists and ecologists are, well, in certain point, art is embedding all these political, economical, ecological, no? Because economical, also the footprint, the mining process of Bitcoin is incredible, no? how energy and resources is spending, no? So coming back to this idea of behind the layer, the first layer of the graphic user interface, this huge problems happens, no, without the gaze of the user, no. So artists point out one of the important function artists doing right now is reporting, no, issues technologies are provoking.
Okay, thank you. I see here that we've got some problems because we cannot get in questions from outside. Okay.
Can I just add one point
yes,
to discuss?
yes.
Because it's just that we have our colleagues here in Linz sitting also on the on this panel, and I just want to refer to one session which was actually happening in Linz. It's a festival which is called Art Meets Radical Openness. That's called, you can find it radical-openness.org. And there was a whole discussion about this whole data ethics, or how to actually handle data, with of course with the question, can we organize a union around data rights, so to say. This was actually organized by Larisa Blasic, and if you're interested in it, just search for Data Union and the kind of outcomes around that work lab, which happened during the Art Meets Radical Openness discussion. And I think it's an interesting thought that we also have to consider creating these kind of unions for data values as well.
Okay, thank you.
I see. Wait a moment. Penesta.
Yes, please. I
Do
try
you hear
to
me?
make. Yeah, I hear you. Yeah.
See now. I see now the questions here on the other interface. There is one question for Rilla and her team. Should I read it to you?
Yes, please.
What is the path you recommend to audiences or netizens to activate NeoCap engagement with confronting the Quebec's government denial of systemic racism? Thank you.
Okay. So this is Rilla.
Let me just think about that. So I guess the main thing there is Quebec government's denial of systemic racism. I guess one thing that would be interesting when we can take this out into the wild is it would be really interesting to perhaps collate recordings of people actually using this, because I suspect that some of the people who do use this or who interact with it will be a little bit confrontational. I suspect others will be open to it as well, but sort of putting all of these perspectives together and then somehow sharing that with news outlets, for instance, that could be a way to get out there what average people think about niqab, about hijab, about religious symbols that Muslim women wear. Like it would, yeah. I guess something like this, in a nutshell, it provides a way to get a very targeted kind of perspective on this particular topic.
Mm-hmm.
Mm-hmm. Can you add also something to this, Adnan? Would you also have to say something in this connection?
No, I think that's absolutely fine in the moment. I leave it. Okay. I leave it at that.
Adnan, there is a question for you by Ben Bogart, and he asks you, are you suggesting ethics should be linked to the subjective feeling?
Okay, thank you, Christa.
Well, I think one thing we as humans should be aware of is that we do operate on feelings. So I think ethics is strongly connected to feelings, though subjective. I don't know really what Ben would mean by subjective feelings, as I would really strongly suggest that we really do talk about feelings we perceive day in, day out as humans. And I think that is strong, for me, that is strongly related to ethics. But also the whole discussion we have as a society. So I would say ethics certainly will have to include humans and their human emotions. Yes, that's what I would in short say.
Mm-hmm. Okay, thank you. So, and we have another question, maybe, Christa, you see another question, maybe?
Yeah, there's actually, I think this is probably for César, I suppose, because it's by Anne Nichten, who is a good friend. And she says that we, the presenters, and I guess she means also César, she would like to know who are the audiences who should experience these strategies. I guess, César, you could tell us about this, I suppose.
As broad as possible. Who are the audience?
Okay.
These strategies are from artists for citizens against behavioral culture, no? So it's clear that it's against these companies which are like without asking, no, without any permission, using every kind of data that we are using, and for all citizens.
Mm-hmm.
Okay.
And then there's, I think that's a very last one. Alice Jim says, such a necessary and informative discussion. So grateful to the speakers for their important research. So I think that's a nice statement.
Yeah, thank you. Maybe for all the presenters, last question, just to wrap up. What is the most important then that we can take today from this point of view now, due to the politics of sanctions, which are now for the specific fields? Each of you have specific fields, the main devices, or in this case to say the main solutions at all. How do you see this?
Shall I make a go? I think what really struck me was the kneecap notion of actually masking, or the face masks. And I think one thing which just stays or resonates with me is actually what do we do with camouflage? How do we actually deal with face recognition systems and these kind of let's say tech which is up and coming and actually surveying us, especially given also the current situation now we are in with the pandemic. I think that is something I think you could really very well go further on with the whole kneecap discussion and bring it into this ethical realm, so to say, around the surveillance state.
Okay, thank you. Who wants to say the last?
Basically every selfie that we are taking with masks are training algorithms or detecting people with masks.
I am very glad that I don't have to wear now a mask here. Yeah. Okay, Rilla?
Okay, so continuing with thinking about how used to masks we are at this point in time. I remember, like, I don't know if my experience is reflective of everyone, but I initially felt uncomfortable about wearing a mask myself. I don't wear niqab myself or hijab. And then I quickly got accustomed to it. And at this point, like, I find that I'm able to read social cues sufficiently, even without seeing people's mouths. So yeah, I'm not entirely sure where I'm going with this, but I think a lot of the assumptions we have around sociality and emotion detection and needing to see people's whole faces, I think humans are actually much better at detecting emotion even when parts of the face are hidden. And if humans are good at that, then machines could absolutely be trained to tell a whole lot about us just from
Hopefully.
even the structure of our head, the structure of my profile, like a lot can be told. So that is definitely of concern.
Okay, thank you. Christa, please.
Yes, also I think I really like this discussion and also these different aspects that we've seen now about these ethical, issues about data capture, data capitalism, etc. And I think there's so much work to be done still in the future from the artists, from the designers, from people from politics and ethics. And that's why we, just in the Institute of Media here at Interface Culture, we have a new professorship called Critical Data in our department. And it's very fresh and new, and we hope to do more research in this area.
Mm-hmm. Thank you very much. So I just use the opportunity as last to thank you all for the participating in this session, and it was great to have such great presenters, and thanks to all the guests that are hearing. And also I want to thank very much to ISEA. And please stay on and join us for the network break for more informal conversation.